Good afternoon, everyone. The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize this traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who walk this time since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. And with that, I'd like to call this meeting to order at 4:01. Council, any additions or deletions to today's agenda? Seeing none. Administration?
Nothing from administration.
Thank you, CEO Panasic. With that, council, entertain a motion. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that we adopt the regular agenda for March 21st, 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Council, we have a motion on the floor. We'll give Ms. Davy Campbell a moment and it should come up. No. I do not have it. That will be one moment. We'll just vote on this one. Traditionally, council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. That'll bring us to our council's minute for adoptions. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we adopt the regular council meeting minutes for March 7th, 2023, and the committee of the whole March 14th, 2023 draft minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question and give Ms. Davy Campbell a moment to put that up. Councillor Haas.
Just to clarify, we have a motion here, but it's only for March 7th. Do we need two motions with this system?
Thank you. The second one will come up right after.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Haas. And with the technical difficulties, I do not see anything coming up on mine. We'll just vote traditionally on the first motion for the regular council minutes for March 7th. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously, and I'll ask for another motion for the March 14th by Councillor Race also. Any debate or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That is passed unanimously. That brings us to our citizens minute with council. This is your opportunity to come forward, state your name and share your thoughts. Yeah, just come forward and to the mic. Yeah, you can just, you have a minute. You just say your name and talk about whichever issue you may have. Oh, are you talking about the public hearing? Yeah. This is not the time. No, this is just a minute with council. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Thanks. Okay, absolutely.
Walter Woodley, I just a question actually. When can I expect the decision on the River Forest Heights bench?
Yeah.
Asking like an estimate. Be decided.
Yeah, at this time, we have no information on when it'll be decided. But this is not the venue for the dialogue to go back and forth. Like I said, you can reach out to me or the CAO and we can work on the details of dates and things like that. But if you'd like to take your minute to talk about your issue or bring that up again, please state it.
I think it's fine. I just was curious.
Yeah.
Thought I'd bring it here to the whole council.
Yeah.
Understand what
Yeah. I can follow up with the CEO and get back to you after the meeting.
Together to present it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Anyone else with a minute with council? Seeing none, that'll bring us to our public hearing portion for this afternoon. Moment there. The following public hearing is held pursuant to the proposed road closure bylaw 1176. The following rules of conduct will be followed during this public hearing. Presentation should be brief and to the point. The order of the presentation shall be entries of written submissions, those supporting the bylaw, those opposing the bylaw, and any other person deemed to be affected by the bylaw. Council may ask questions of the speakers after each presentation for clarification purposes. There will be no debating the bylaw. However, questions to the councillors or other parties will be accepted through the chair. I hereby declare the public hearing related to this bylaw now open. Administration.
Thank you, Mayor. I will turn this over to Ms. Paquette, I believe.
It's the secretary's portion of the public hearing.
The purpose of the proposed bylaw number 1176 is to permanently close the following described road. Plan 4703 TR, all that portions of road, highway, street lying southwest of the southwesterly production of the southeast boundary of Corner Cutoff Road, Keel Drive on plan 0826212 across said road, excepting thorough mine and all mines and minerals. The bylaw is attached as attachment 1. First reading was given to bylaw number 1176 on February 21st, 2023. Notice of this public hearing was advertised consecutively in the Hinton Voice newspaper on March 9th and March 16th, as well as advertised on the Town of Hinton website, Civic Send, and Facebook. No written submissions have been received prior to the public hearing.
Thank you, administration. Are there any late written submissions related to bylaw 1176?
No, there are none.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of bylaw 1176? Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in opposition of bylaw 1176?
Thank you. My name is Ken Harrismew. I am the owner of Clearview Advertising, and I have billboards along that stretch, and I understand they're going to be gone. Once this development occurs, I understand the billboards will be coming down. I'm just wondering if there is any consideration for compensation for loss of revenue or my assets that are there.
Okay, perfect. Any further questions for us to consider?
No,
Okay,
thank you.
there's a portion that's coming up right after this where we'll be able to ask administration for clarifying
Okay, so
questions regarding that.
okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Is there anyone present who is deemed to be affected by bylaw 1176 who wishes to speak? Do the councillors have any further questions? Councillor Taylor.
Can administration speak to the question about the billboards?
You can ask that question to administration. Yeah.
Certainly through the mayor, I'll look to members of my team. I haven't been working directly with the billboard agreements, but I know though that those are in place. Those have been a consideration. So I would possibly pass it along to planning and development if there is any update on that.
It'll need to have a 30-day notification period if there's a change in plan. But we will be working with all those owners to have those discussions and provide at least some estimated timeline. It could be at least a year out. We're required.
Thank you. Administration, anything further to add on that?
Nothing further.
Thank you. Councillors, Do you require any further information? Seeing none, I hereby declare that the public hearing relating to bylaw 1176 is closed and will accept a motion to adjourn. Councillor Magoon,
I'd like to move that we adjourn the public hearing slated for, or pardon me, regarding bylaw number 1176, slated for March 21st, 2023.
thank you, Councillor Magoon, and we will vote traditionally. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. That'll bring us to our first action item for this evening, the draft one-off financial request policy CS 72-01 administration.
Thank you, Mayor. I will pass this along to Ms. Juke.
Thank you, CAO Panasic, and through the mayor to the rest of council. This report presents a new policy, CS 7201, which was developed through Committee of the Whole starting in January this year. And it provides a mechanism for managing one-time financial requests of council from groups in the community. The process that the policy sets up is meant to be fairly simple and straightforward. It's designed for those requests for town funding and in-kind support that don't fit better in the civic partnership or the community grant streams. New to the policy before council today from its last iteration are the two forms that the public will use added as Appendix A and B. The first one is to engage the town through administration and allow the request to be prepared for council with some perspectives on the request. The other is to report back to council on the outcomes of the group's initiative and use of funding. The last thing I'll add for those who are seeing this for the first time is this policy directly pertains to use of the council contingency fund budget line as specified in the policy. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Juke. I have Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, normally I wouldn't do this at the last moment, but you know how it is. Every time you read something, you pick up something new. I was just wondering if we had the right definition for one-off financial requests and requests. It seems to be our asks from Hinton and area groups for monetary and non-monetary support, typically in the form of donation, sponsorship, and or one or more in-kind contributions. So a one-off financial request is a one-off request that's done at an unusual time, yet we don't define what the unusual time is there. I'm just wondering, it seemed odd to me, that's all. Could you comment on that?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through the rest of council. The one-off financial requests and requests are asks as it specifies, and typically they come in the form of a donation, which is a monetary or in-kind contribution towards an initiative. It doesn't contain any promise of return to the town, such as appearances or tickets to the event, PR opportunities for mayor and council, or anything of that nature, which is more of a sponsorship type request. Sponsorship usually carries with it significant amounts of acknowledgement in one way or another, although donation can do that as well.
Okay, so since we're not, so this could be a request that comes during the community grant process. Or this could be a request that comes when we're dealing with civic agencies. It's not clear that this is a one-off request that occurs outside of unusual times. So somebody walking in here who doesn't get can come right in here on the community grant request and put the week before and do a one-off request here. So I was wondering if that's what council really had in mind with this. I don't think so.
Anything further, Councillor Taylor?
Well, if nobody's interested in fixing the definition, I mean, I would put something in here to clarify that a one-off request. What we mean by one-off is something that occurs outside of the civic agency or community grant process. That's what I was thinking that a one-off request is, and I thought that should be in 6.6. Otherwise, those requests can come at exactly the same time we're doing the community grant process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I don't feel the same way with the definition because within the document, it states and that's part of both the CAO's responsibility when reviewing it. If it does fall within that time frame, then it wouldn't come to us. So, I mean, it doesn't stop anybody from putting in a request, but it then goes through that part of the process. So I wouldn't, because maybe we might take a look at it because maybe it's something that doesn't fit that particular funding. So I don't want to deny that potentially, right? So I think it's covered within the document itself. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in full understanding of what Councillor Taylor's asking. A clarifying definition that indicates to anybody who might be thinking of applying for this, that this is for something that doesn't fall within the parameters of community grant funding or other funding that's available through the town. And I agree. So if Councillor Taylor or another councillor was to make a motion to put some clarifying language around that, I certainly would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Taylor can use all the help you can all provide on this one. Somewhere in 6.6 to put that this is a request that comes outside of the period of time in which we're dealing with the community grant program. Do you have better wording?
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michelson, through the rest of council. I believe that concern that Councillor Taylor has been addressed in the policy. This was brought up at committee and there was amendments made to the policy. So I'll just draw your attention to section 4.1, which is council is responsible for consideration whether the request could have reasonably been known and submitted at community grant intake and or through a civic agency request, and whether the request can be postponed until the next community grant intake. So I believe that was brought up in committee, and I do believe that the provisions that were suggested to address that were approved by committee.
CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, through to the rest of council. One suggestion that I would have at the end of 6.6 would to say that it's subject to the conditions of this policy. So the reader doesn't look at a definition in isolation, but takes into the full context of the policy.
Councillor Taylor.
I think that's satisfactory.
So would you like to put forward that motion to amend section 6.6?
Yes, I'd like to put a forth on a motion to amend 6.6 to say what he said.
Okay, perfect. I'll give administration a moment to put that together.
So, subject to the conditions in this policy, I think is what the CEO said. Yeah. Subject to the conditions with an S.
Anything further, Councillor Taylor? Are you good with the wording?
Oh, I think that would include that item that we added last week. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate, questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question and we will go to our voting system. Council race. And that is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for this item? Any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council approves the one-off financial request policy CS-7201 as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate, questions? Seeing none, we will go to voting. And that is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for our first action item for this afternoon? Seeing, Councillor Hawes.
Just a, I guess, quick question. Now that this policy has been passed, I'm assuming administration will do some communication out in the public to let know of this new policy so that everybody's aware of it. Is that safe to say?
Through the mayor, yes, that is correct. We also do have a number of one-off requests that are in queue right now. So we'll be communicating generally and specific to those groups to ensure that they're in compliance with the new policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Seeing no one else, thank you, administration. That brings us to 7.2, appointment of municipal assessor, CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So we're bringing this forward as more of a housekeeping item. The appointment of our municipal assessor has expired as has his contract. We have extended that contract for another year extension to ensure that we have assessment services for this year. We just as a side note, we do intend on going out to a competitive process this summer to make sure that we have adequate time to make that transition, as it's not possible now. But we are recommending that council appoint Mr. Warren Powers with Powers and Associates Appraisal Services to the position of assessor as per bylaw number 961 for a one-year term.
Thank you, CEO Panasic. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the council appoint Mr. Warren Powers with Powers and Associates Appraisal Services to the position of assessor as per bylaw number 961 for a one-year term.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate or questions? Seeing none, we will go to voting. Is it not populating? I have Councillor Hawes and myself. For the sake of time and technical reasons, we will just vote traditionally for this one. Council, all those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Council, anything further for 7.2? Seeing no one, thank you, administration. That'll bring us to 7.3, Hinton Mountain Bike Association Operating Agreement, CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor. I will turn this one over to Ms. Juke.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, through to the rest of council. This report is before council to present the new operating agreement proposed between the town and the Hinton Mountain Bike Park Association for operation of the Hinton Mountain Bike Park. This agreement was fully drafted with the association based on the recently expired agreement before the template civic agency agreement was finalized that we have now drafted up. So it's not in the form of the template, which council will see shortly. The specific services to be provided, how the town supports the association, and how the agreement works legally are all somewhat mixed in this format, but it was developed over time as the working relationship developed. That having been said, the respective parties, including the Park Service Unit, are well versed in their obligations and their aims in this agreement. Like all the agreements that council will see that were requested to be drafted up in November of last year, there is nothing that obligates council or the town to fund the agency in any year, except for 2023. And you'll also see that the termination clause is robust for the town. Just want to make sure that everybody understands it's not a guaranteed funding. And with that, Supervisor Oshanek and I will take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, administration. Council, any questions or direction? Councillor Taylor.
I'm just wondering about the capital funding getting carried over year after year after year, and then it accumulates to a sum of money. And then we do that with all these agencies. And then we run into a situation where we have something critical that breaks in the town that we need to fix. We've got all these agreements and money tied up in capital funding with these agencies. Do we still have access to that money in that sort of emergent situation?
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and through to the rest of council. That capital funding is held in a reserve that is the town owns. It's a pledge that we've made with the group, and this group will utilize that funding from time to time. There are, as to my knowledge, only 2 civic agencies that have a reserve accumulating. This one, HIMBA, and the Hinton Disc Golf Association as well. They're modest amounts. They do accumulate in those funds, but there's nothing again in this agreement that commits us to funding any project. Projects are brought forward, proposed, administration and council reviews those, and then approval may be issued and funding issued, to my understanding.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, Councillor Hawes.
Just a quick question. The organizations are aware of those terms clearly, that if we were to, as a council or as a town, say, hey, we need those funds, they're fully aware of that? Because my expectation is they assume that capital is theirs because we put it aside for them. That's my, I guess, concern.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and through to the rest of council. I can't speak to the communications that have occurred between the town and this group, just being fairly new as well, but I do understand, I have clarified with finance, it's under no circumstances has that money been released to the groups. It's accumulated with the understanding that they do bring forward projects from time to time, and it's a little hard on the annual budget to just fund those in any given year, and that rather than that, we're putting small contributions forward. But again, the money is held by the town of Hinton. It is not issued. And if there was an emergency, I think negotiations would be opened up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, Councillor Taylor.
What you said about us maybe funding it being in certain situations, not agreeing to fund something. Where's that written in this document? What clause is that?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and through to the rest of council. I'll have to review the agreement again and just find those items for you. I do know that there is nothing promised in this agreement that says the funds are yours. That's not the case, so it won't be in this agreement.
Because that's sort of in answering to Councillor Hawes's question, the obvious place to put it would be in the agreement that you're signing. So if that is the case, that should be in the agreement that you're signing, that under urgent or emergent situations, we might not fund that, then it's clearly in the agreement that they signed. So
I believe it's under section 9 of the agreement, at least for HIMBA. That it under provision 9.2. Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michelson, through the rest of council. Thanks for that clarification. It is indeed there. As and quite well spelled out, I think. Projects are to be approved by the town before they're funded.
Anything further, Councillor Taylor? Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think administration, feel free to correct me on this, but procedurally, anytime the town looks to spend finances out of a dedicated reserve such as that, it comes before council ultimately. So I think that's the other check stop that councillors might be looking for as well, because I can't remember, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, in any of our other operating agreements where we very specifically spelt out that capital reserve funding, like in the case of the disc golf course, is only sort of available at the discretion of the town with that sort of specific language outside of, you know, our normal operating procedures for spending money out of a reserve. So.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Haas.
Sorry, was that Mr. Councillor Magoon? You were asking them a question. I guess I'd like need that answer first.
Was that a question, Councillor Magoon, to administration?
Sorry if I may. No, really, I was just trying to point out the fact that procedurally, we can't spend money out of a dedicated reserve without it coming before council. That is your full stop. Sorry, as far as I'm concerned, just my own perception is that's the ultimate lock and key there.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Haas.
Okay, so I guess because I'm reading 9.2 and I agree with you 100%, that is a typical, but 9.2 does not say that. It's to access the capital funds, they'll submit a request for approval from the town of Hinton liaison. And nowhere does this state it has to come to council. And I guess my other then tag on to that is we've run into where we look at capital projects and we were putting capital projects and we were comparing them to town and then also to organizations like HIMBA and whether or not they'd fit, but we were looking at potentially that money's there and why would it go through that process particularly and be compared to other projects, I guess, in the past. So that's where I'm kind of, that doesn't state that here. And I guess that's my clarity. Does the group understand based on this agreement that any funds that are going to be used out of that fund would come to council first for decision? And two, that fund may be used for other things if council decided to, because they plan on 5-10 year projects, capital plans. And if that were to be, monkey wrench thrown into that. So I guess that's my only concern with this.
Council, what would we like to do with this item?
Mayor, if I could, just as possibly a little bit of context to this, council always, regardless of its included in here, has the control through whether it's capital or the operating funding through the annual budget process. I don't see it explicitly laid out in this agreement. We certainly could do that for the sake of transparency. So everybody knows, both the municipality and the user group, that these are all subject to budgetary approval from council. And, things do come up, in council. I think we want to honor our agreements, but in certain situations, if there is no ability to do that, we have to be able to pivot. So we can certainly include those into these agreements just as a clarity item.
Thank you, CO Panasic. Councillor Taylor.
I'd feel more comfortable if that was included in the agreement. That I don't know where to put it, but I'd leave it to administration without micromanaging it here. That that this agreement is subject to the annual budget process of council, or whatever the wording would be. because I've heard people from some of these groups come up and they regard this money as theirs once they've got it, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, 99.9% of the time it is.
So are you proposing to put forward a motion, Councillor Taylor?
I thought I just did.
Administration?
Okay, I'd like to move to put forward a motion to make this subject to the normal budgetary process, the funding in this agreement, subject to the normal budgetary process. Look forward to the CEO to help modify that or put it in an appropriate spot.
Through the mayor to the rest of council, my suggestion would be that in both section 9 and section 10, being the capital and the operating funding, that we include a clause that funding will be subject to budgetary approval on an annual basis.
Councillor Taylor?
I believe the wording was funding will be subject to. The budgetary approval process that occurs on an annual basis. And then comma at the end. And this clause will go into sections 9 and 10. And I think we want the word process after budget approval process. I think that addresses this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I have Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Well, I appreciate the intent of the motion. I'm not going to support it for a couple of reasons. But to my understanding, these are dedicated reserves that are put in place for these organizations to put capital funding per year into, so that they can let those capital project reserves accumulate. If they have a 4-year project, they can save for 4 years. And then with a request to council that council approves, they can get that money so that they can do their capital project. I think this muddies the waters, it dirties it. And I also have concerns about it putting into section 10 when 10.1 already says the town of Hinton will budget $22,000 annually. So it states in there that it is in the budget. We all know, and I think the groups know, council has the ultimate control of the budget, and that dollar value could be changed at any point. The other reason that I don't necessarily propose tying access to the capital funds to the budget process is that they may have a capital project that comes up that doesn't fall completely within the budget cycle, that they need to access that capital funding outside of the budget process, which is why I prefer the wording that's here, that they submit a request at least 90 days prior to the proposed project start. It doesn't tie their hands to having to put it in at budget time so that they can do a project following July. I do have an alternate suggestion that potentially would make council more comfortable in clarifying the wording in section 9. I think it would be simple and easy, and it would be simply to add the word council. To access capital funds, the HMBA will submit a request for council approval to the TOH liaison yada, yada, yada. So I'm prepared to put that forward once we see what happens with this one, if this one doesn't go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, I guess my question is because the agreement before us is signed by designates from the from HIMBA. If any changes to it will require it going back to HIMBA for their own approval.
That's correct.
And I guess, so to speak to it, I won't be supportive of the change at this point. I think the measures are in place where ultimately council does have control, and I share a number of the same concerns that Councillor Ostashik had previously mentioned. So there's no point in rehashing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, any further debate or questions? Councillor Stashik?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to come back to it, but with the understanding now that I have with Councillor, that question that Councillor Magoon just asked, I likely wouldn't be putting a motion forward to change this. I don't want it to have to go back to HIMBA to get their approval again. I think it's clear to everyone that the approval process for accessing capital funds from a dedicated reserve is council approval. That's the process for accessing money that's in any dedicated reserve. So I feel that the wording in 9.2 is clear enough in the way that it is. They have to submit a request for approval. The approving body is council because it's a dedicated reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One more final thing. I think for myself, in spirit, there's a bit of a, forgive the term, a gentleman's agreement here, is that when we have this operating agreement, we have an understanding with HIMBA that this money is going to go into a dedicated capital reserve. If for any reason there is something so urgent that council feels the need in working with administration to use those funds in another such way, I think we would owe it to the spirit of partnership to have a sit down conversation with the organization and say, hey, look, Houston, we have a problem. This funding needs to be utilized in a different way. Not so much that, well, we'll just throw the term into the paper and hope that covers it. I think that would be bad governance. So for myself, the opposite, you know, it would be important for us to sit down and have that face-to-face communication.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Taylor?
I think I still support this. I think good governance is clearly articulating the process. And I think this is like a 0.0001% chance that they wouldn't get the funding, but as it's been explained clearly to me twice now, that is a chance that could occur, and to put it into the agreement, I think is just wise. And of course, we would talk to them about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, any further debate or questions? Seeing none, we will go to voting. And that is defeated 4-2 with for Councillor Taylor and Councillor Race. Council, any further direction? Councillor Magoon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to make the motion that council approve the 2023 to 2025 operating agreement with the Hinton Mountain Bike Park Association for the operation of the Hinton Mountain Bike Park as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Taylor?
I will be supporting this. And the reason I will be supporting this is I think we get very good value out of these guys. The amount of money that we spent and the number of people that show up to the Hinton Mountain Bike Club are outstanding. And it serves for me as kind of a baseline to almost judge other expenditures of dollars with, because you go on a busy weekend, or you even go on a slow weekend, there's lots of people, lots of cars. This is good value for money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Haas?
Yeah, I'll be in support of this, and it also is the efficiencies of our budget process. You know, this then doesn't have the group having to come back to us. You know, they know what their funding is for the next 2 years. It still goes through the process, but it doesn't mean we need to hear from the group like we have in the past. So I think there's win-win for them. They have some consistency, you know, and the efficiencies that this also creates. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, anything further before I call this to question? Seeing none, we will open voting. And that is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for action item 7.3 this afternoon? Seeing none, thank you, administration. That brings us to the Hinton and District Chamber of Commerce Agreement. CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, through the rest of council. I will pass this one as well over to Ms. Juke.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and through to the rest of council. This report is before council to seek approval of the new agreement between the town and the Hinton and District Chamber of Commerce for the Visitor Information Center services for a 2-year with an option to renew. The previous agreement did expire on December 31st, 2022. Again, council has approved budget for 2023 for this agency. And the specific services are captured in Schedule A. And while updated, these are virtually verbatim from the prior agreement. So what you're seeing here is the template agreement that we're hoping to use with all civic agencies. This civic agency doesn't have a capital reserve, so that piece is not in this particular agreement. But you're going to see some real consistency moving forward with the legal relationship being captured in the body of the agreement and specifics about the agency and the town's obligations. Services specific in the schedules. Other than that, I'm just going back to my notes here. So up-to-date legal language and consistent parameters around the use of funding, agency and the town obligations legally are captured in sections 5 and 6. Key performance indicators are in Schedule B, and we're thinking that those will probably develop over time as we get an idea of what that should look like. But other than that, the key elements are that annual funding is not guaranteed. It's dependent on council budget decisions. Again, it's a 2-year with an optional renewal for a 3rd. And with that, administration and executive director Natalie Charlton is here as well to answer any questions that you might have about the services.
Thank you, Ms. Juke. I have Councillor Magoon.
A very simple question on 11.3 of the draft agreement. And I'm assuming because we're partially looking at a template agreement. On our copy, it has highlighted number million and then $1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, $7. I'm assuming that's just because it's a budgetary template.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and through the rest of council. My apologies for that. Yes, it was a late piece of information that I received from the chamber. It is in fact $5 million. It will be shown there as $5 million liability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, what would we like to do with this item? Any councillor? Councillor Taylor.
I'd like to put the recommended action in as a motion, please. That's what I intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate or questions? Seeing none, we will open voting. And that is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for 7.4? Seeing none, thank you, administration. That brings us to our last action item, 7.5 budget 2023 document, CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, and the rest of council. I will pass this over to Ms. Borbeau.
Thank you, CAO Podastic, your worship, member of councils. Before you today is the promised publication of the 2023 budget document. The document is meant to bring an increased level of understanding and transparency to the operating and capital budgets approved by council. And we're hoping that this increased transparency translates for council staff as well as the general public. While the publication is very much a collaborative effort, I would like to make mention to the senior leadership team. Thanks, Fuchsia Dragon, our communications coordinator, for ensuring the final document was easily understood and appealing to read. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Barbeau. I have Councillor Taylor.
On page 7, net municipal taxes are scheduled to increase from the budgeted amount between 2022 and 2023 by 5.2 to 5.3%. I was always under the impression it was going to increase by 3.9. Can you explain the difference, please?
Through the chair to Councillor Taylor. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question. Which taxes?
On net municipal taxes on page 7, it's gone up from 3,099,872 to 3,825,941. That's a 5.2% increase. All along, I don't know about the rest of council, but I've been anticipating a 3.9% increase, not a 5.2, 5.3% increase. So what's the additional 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 for?
Through the chair to all of council, I will have to go back in and check that number. We created this document from the final budget publication that council had approved back on December 6th. I believe there was a change to potentially the requisition amount, but we will confirm that and bring it back to council. We are very aware that the tax increase was to be no more than 3.9%, and we're working and striving to meet that.
Through the mayor to the rest of council, just to provide some additional context to that as well. As a part of that, the motion that was put on the floor early on as direction was that the tax rate would not increase by more than 3.9. But with that being said, we are not in control of the assessments, and my assumption is that in either increased assessments or new assessment, it would be play a big part of that total number.
Councillor Taylor.
I think that's okay. If you together, you're telling me that new assessments I get. But by and large, the intent is to have a 3.9% tax increase. That's what we're for the individual property tax owners when they get their tax. There could be new properties coming up that we're taxing that could affect that, and that could be why we have a slightly bigger number. Okay, but that's the intent, is what I heard over there. That's yes. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, any further questions, comments, direction? At this time, Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the council accepts the budget 2023 document for information.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions? Councillor Taylor.
No, I support that. I can make my question as a comment later. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any debate? Any questions? Seeing none, we will open voting. And that is carried unanimously. Council, any further questions? Councillor Taylor.
I think because we're talking about the 2023 budget document, it's appropriate that I could put a motion forward on the tax surplus from 2022. What I'd like to do is because they're intimately linked, what I'd like to do, because of the timing that everything that's coming, what's happening is on April 11th, we're going to get the audited financial statements. And then in May, we're going to have to vote on the tax bylaw bill. So we are going to have, to my understanding, potentially a significant tax surplus from 2023 to consider. And the time to consider that is very short. So the motion that I'd like to put forward would be that we direct administration to prepare a report on how to utilize the 2022 tax surplus, including offsetting tax revenue for 2023 for the April 11th committee meeting. And that'll be the same time that we get the financial document that tells exactly what that number is. So it coincides well with that. And then we'll have, and then we can discuss and vote on it at one of the regular council meetings, perhaps even April 18th. So we can get that sorted out before we vote on the tax bylaw bill, especially if we have a significant surplus, which is potential, like, I mean, $1 million or more.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you.
Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions or comments? Councillor McGoon?
Yeah, just, I guess a question for administration. If this direction were to pass, would part of the information we get back, if there was any, if part of that surplus was due to things like capital projects that hadn't yet been acted upon, et cetera, before council made any further decisions about potentially tax relief or those sorts of things?
Through the mayor, rest of council, yes. As a part of that discussion, we will have explanations on any 2022 surplus.
Thank you, Councillor McGoon. Thank you, administration. Council, any further debate or questions? Seeing none, I will open voting. And that is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for 7.5? Councillor Taylor.
I'd like to make a comment on page 6, just a comment, but I think it's important to make that comment. And that's that when you look at the water, sewer and waste utilities, you see actually documented what I've been told recently. I ran into people who, these friends of ours that moved from Grand Prairie to Hinton, and they said, your utility rates are 50% off the utility rates in Grand Prairie. You should be very thankful that you have those utility rates. So if we look here, we can find out that we're paying $75 a month, and virtually everybody else is paying the equivalent of $150 per month. And I guess the point I'd like to make is this is because we're working closely in partnership with West Fraser. And that has allowed us to get savings on the water and the waste. And those savings might not continue in the future, but the taxpayer of Hinton on their utility bills are getting $70 to $75 a month reduction over comparator towns, including Grand Prairie, on the waste and the sewer. That's a very significant number, and it's probably going to change into the future. So I thought that was important to mention. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, anything further for 7.5? Seeing none, thank you, administration. That'll bring us to our correspondence this afternoon, 8.1. Council, any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Hawes.
Like to move that we accept the council information package for March 21st, 2023 meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have a motion on the floor to accept for information. Any questions? Seeing none, we will open voting. That is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for our correspondence? Seeing none, any notices of motion this afternoon? Seeing none, and that brings us to our reporting, and I will begin to my right with Councillor Taylor.
Nothing formal to report, although I did go for a walk on the Beaver Boardwalk and the work is started. The trucks and the equipment are showing up right now, or they were showing up today. Stakes have been in the ground for a while, but the actual what do you call those, rig mats and porta potties or whatever are starting to show up. So we should see stuff getting done real soon here, from what I can see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two things to report on. Our take it or leave it pilot project for 2023. I'm very excited about it. It commences May 1st, which would be our first drop off day, the first day that you could leave something at that facility. And that would happen on the 1st and the 3rd of May. On the 6th and 7th, if you are regretful that you left that there on the 1st and 3rd, on the 6th and 7th, you can go back and get it. Okay. I'm really excited about this project. Still looking for volunteers to help. So if you'd like to volunteer, just give us a call. Another thing that's really exciting is our Kick It to the Curb. This year we are celebrating our 10th year of doing Kick It to the Curb in Hinton. And that's all about recycling, repurposing, and reusing something that I have no longer need. And Councillor Taylor's going to pick it up and take it home and spruce it up. So that's going to happen May 13th and 14th of this year. So get out there and start cleaning out your basement and your garages. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have anything to report, but I do have a question for administration, if I may. So I'm glad to hear from Councillor Taylor that the work has started on the Beaver Boardwalk. I've been going by and not seeing too much happening, and I've been fielding questions from citizens wanting to know when that's going to happen. And members of the Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee, were quite concerned that work hasn't started yet, and they're worried about the weather window closing to be able to get that done. So my question to administration is, I'm assuming they've been in contact with the contractor discussing the project, and I'm wondering if the contractor is still confident that they'll be able to complete the work within the weather window that's available to them.
Thank you, Councillor. I will pass that one on to Mr. Russo.
Good evening, Council, through the chair to Mayor and Council. So just to Councillor Stasik's comment, yes, we have had communication with the contractor in terms of the timelines. They have started several days later than the anticipated date that was in the tender. That being said, we are still within the window. I know it's warming up here rapidly, but the ground is still frozen. And in terms of the timeline that they've given us and the revised timeline, they will still be meeting that. We're also in close contact through our consultants with AEP, who is the ruling body that ensures that we stay within the limitations of what was given to us. The reason for the delay was twofold. One was the galvanizing of the piles and the timeline to that. And secondly was to secure the timber as well for the rest of the boardwalk. Just to mention that once the piles is in the ground, we no longer are under the AEP specifics to build the boardwalk. So we will be completing the project in terms of the scheduled timeline that was given, though it's shifted a bit in terms of the mobilization. So we're confident it's a day-by-day sort of interaction, but we're happy to know that mobilization has occurred and we will be starting the actual piling very quickly. Once they start piling, it is basically just ramming them into the ground and we can move pretty rapidly.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Thank you, Councillor Stashik. That brings me to Councillor Lagoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended two meetings. I do have to apologize. One of them was our policing and emergency services meeting. Unfortunately, I kept my notes old school and on paper for that meeting. Unfortunately, they're not here, so I feel like the kid who forgot his homework. So I will give that update at the next meeting. I also attended the Pulp Advisory Committee meeting on behalf of Councillor Taylor. Overall, we've seen in the last month a massive decrease in odor and TRS emissions. I think everybody will remember we did have a period of time after Christmas where things were quite active. We're below all of the BOD limits and suspended solid limits. That was great. In January, there were a total of 8 reportable environmental incidences, 6 non-compliance, 2 spill. And then we were informed that the mill turnaround or shutdown dates, as most people probably commonly know them, will go from June 2nd to the 23rd this year, a little later than normal. But just again, so folks are in the know. And then last but not least, we received a presentation by Jen Bays on the unbleached craft pulp process that's taking place now, which it was short, but I found it really interesting. It started with a bit of a system schematic about which areas of the pulp mill currently are essentially not being used in that process. And a good portion of the mill is no longer part of the production line process. But that being said, we were told the infrastructure, which is no longer being used, it's not being fully decommissioned or removed from the mill. It's going to stay on site for the purposes of if they choose to activate it again, or they find that they need that particular piece of equipment to make the production that they're doing right now easier. So things will effectively stay in place. Jen went through and showed us some of the products that they're going to be focusing on with the unbleached process. Things like first use items like cups, paper wrappers for food stuff, containers like that. So it was quite interesting to see. And then the next meeting is scheduled for May 15th because there is Victoria Day, I believe. So there you go.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things to mention. We had a busy weekend here in Hinton. Friday night, there was a comedy show at the Path. It was a very well attended. They had sold out. So we had a lot of people out there laughing, having a good time. So thank you for all those attended. Plus, there was also I believe a number of people that were from outside of our community that came that had never been to that facility. So it drew in some different people. So got to see what the Path is all about and what it's like. We also on Saturday night had the Battle of the Badges, went and attended that. It was a great night, great turnout. There was a lot of people there. I believe the 50-50 draw was the recipient of that was, I think, $450 some. So and that all those proceeds went to SAR, our search and rescue. And then also the food bank was at the donations at the door as well. And it looked pretty full when I came in and I was there fairly early. It ended up that our fire department did come out on top on that game. It was right down to the wire. I think there was like 3 or 2 seconds left on 1 second left with the winning go-ahead goal. So, but it was a great night. So thanks to everyone that volunteered at that and made that happen. Also just wanted to talk about Youth Advisory Council. I want to thank administration for bringing to our council the discussion debate on our silhouettes for our community. Our council had a lot of great suggestions, great insight into how those silhouettes may look like in the future. So I'm looking forward to seeing that report come to council. They'll see the discussion and the recommendations that our council made on that. And it was, it was very they were very intuitive to what kind of things should be up there that demonstrate our town and represent our town. So looking forward to that. The meeting went so long, unfortunately, on that debate that there was one part we weren't able to see. We had a presentation slotted for the Junior Forest Ranger program that happens throughout the summer. Unfortunately, their due date was, I believe, April 1st, so they were going to miss that. But we did get the council to take a look at it. It was via video. The gentleman was not available. So hopefully next year it'll give some ideas to our group of what's available for summer programming. So other than that, that's all I have to report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hawes. And I know Councillor Hawes said he attended, but Councillor Hawes was volunteering. He was our security guard at the concert or at the comedy show. And he was actioned out to imply, to take care of security. So job well done. I was a little bit worried for you for a while, but everything went to the way it's supposed to. So it was a great show. The only thing for me to talk about today is we had an Evergreens meeting regarding our budget and the requisition for 2023. And the board had agreed or has agreed to requisition our capital amount from 6.25 up to $7 million. We do have a Wildwood construction build. I did vote against that. It was 4-2. I wanted the increase to be a little bit more, 12% increase on capital expenditures. I thought was a little bit high, but the will of the board was to go up to 7 to be in a better financial position to not ask to borrow money in the future. So I understood the rationale from both parts, but albeit a small amount of an increase to each resident, my rationale was people are already living in debt and it's just money that they have to borrow to pay. So even though it's a little amount and we only pay about 10% of the bill in Yellowhead County, and the MDA Greenview pay the huge majority, they were supportive of it. That went forward. So you'll see a 12% increase on what you paid in 2022 for capital requisitions for the Evergreens Foundation. And that's all for me. And I have a question by Councillor Taylor. Sorry. There we go.
The Evergreen requisitions have been going up by that amount for quite a while now. And I guess anytime I complain about it, I'm told that we built something in Hinton, but is it going to end? Like, are we going to get down to like reasonable requisitions? Because the taxpayers got, increases in property taxes, inflation, carbon tax, all this stuff coming at them. And to get 12%, is there some end to those kind of increases coming?
Thank you for the question. That was my rationale. And this is, it should be in the minutes. This was my point. The two biggest builds the Evergreen Foundation have done have been the Parkland Lodge and the Pine Valley Lodge. Those were $30 million and $33 million respectively. Our future bills are actually smaller. So my rationale was, since we're building smaller projects, we should be requisitioning perhaps less and leveraging the expertise of our CAO, Kristen Chambers, in getting provincial money. The train of thought there is they wanted to have more money in our reserves in order to leverage more money from the province to show that our position is stronger. But the context of the conversation was exactly that. At some point, as we're building smaller projects and less projects, at least at that scale, that our requisition should go down. So that is my position, and that's what I've heard from the community. At some point, it has to go down. So it seemed like there was appetite or conversation that there was an end, but the end wasn't in 2023.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you voting the way you did, because these things can't keep going up like extra set missiles. But anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question too that's kind of related to Councillor Taylor's question. I've thought this myself and heard from people in the community that with the scale of the projects that Evergreen's undertaking and the timing of them, in the sense that they're undertaking so many in such a short period of time, it's impacting the Evergreen's contribution rate that citizens pay. But there's also the concern that all these facilities are going to be built within the span of around 5 years. And then there's going to be nothing for a period of 15 years. And then they're all going to require major renovation around the same time. So has there been any thought given towards kind of staggering those projects out rather than having them all come at the same time for construction, and then down the road they're all going to come at the same time for renovation, and try and balance that cycle so we're not getting these spikes and valleys with the Evergreen's contribution requests potentially going up and down to match those construction requirements?
Thank you for the question. It has come up. The rationale was leveraging Ms. Chambers' strength that I don't have the exact number, but I could get the number of matching dollars the province have given to the requisition dollars. So the Evergreens Foundation has built approximately $100 million of capital in the last decade, but yet 7 million is our biggest contribution in the last decade. It's been 5 million or 6 million in less than that. So by doing these projects fast and having that window where the province is matching these funds, and as long as Ms. Chambers and her staff can deliver these projects, the rationale is we're building these buildings in our communities at 50 cents on the dollar with provincial dollars matching, which hasn't been in the concept in the past. Now with a lull or a break between after the Wildwood project that we have a 20-year gap, those could be an opportunity for lower requisitions to plan for the maintenance. So we have discussed that. And if we weren't getting, at least I wouldn't support that unless there was a different direction from council. Without a huge subsidy or lack of matching funds, I would have pushed for a staggered approach for this. But since we were getting nominal, smaller requisitions for the amount of bills we're getting, that's why the group moved forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. These are wonderful facilities and these that are being built in these communities and much needed. It was just more of a comment on whether our citizens might be able to see some semblance of balance in the Evergreens requests. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Stashik, Councillor Taylor.
Since we're seeing some of these really significant increases for capital projects with Evergreens, are we going to actually see decreases in the future? Like, okay, you increased 12% because you had to put a bunch towards capital. So maybe they're not saving enough for capital, but fine. After you've done that 3 or 4 years in a row, you're 30% above where you were basically for capital. So you should be able to back down to an actual decrease in some of the Evergreen requisitions. Is that planned for?
Not planned for, but I think that is the position of some of the board members. I don't want to confuse capital requisitions are very different than operational requisitions. Operational requisitions, you're going to have a status quo. My intent, and I speak only for myself, and it will be the discussion of boards, I see future years of dropping 50%, 60, 70%. Like you could have requisition years in 2027 of perhaps only $2 million, right? Because you don't have those big ticket items. Now the Wildwood project is going to cost in the vicinity of maybe $20 to $22 million. But after that, we have nothing approved on the board of a big magnitude. So again, I suspect that the requisitions should drop tremendously in the future because, like I said, it's not like operating costs that are continuously ongoing. So I hope that answers your question.
No, not really. Does that mean once a requisition increases that the taxpayer has to put up with that increase for forever, or does the taxpayer get a break in the future after we've paid for the capital project?
I'll try to rephrase it. Absolutely, operational increases are ongoing. Capital requisitions are only based on future builds of buildings. If the future builds of buildings doesn't happen, you could see a drastic change or negative increase. You could theoretically have a year where you have a 0% or zero requisition for capital. The reason I brought up operational, you generally will never see drastic decreases in operational requisitions because you can't cut your services that much. Capital, you can totally cut. It's like putting money in our capital budget. So it's a little bit different. So you could see tremendous cuts in the future.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Any further questions on the Evergreens Foundation? Seeing none. No, thank you for your questions. And I think it's good for the public to understand that's the work the board does. And that's the rationale that we sort of use to build these amazing facilities in all of our communities. And with that, that brings me to our CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing to report today unless there is any questions on specific items from council.
Thank you, CAO Panasic. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question in regards to our Airbnbs, thinking back last week, that terrible fire in Montreal, which was an Airbnb fire. Where are we at with our licensing?
Through the mayor to members of council, I don't know what the latest status report is on, we'll say, on our licensing and our enforcement efforts, but I can certainly provide that to council at a later date.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Taylor.
Is the enforcement of the Airbnbs manageable at the $1,500 business license fee? Because there's some people that were projecting that people just wouldn't pay their business license at that high a level. So then compliance would be a nightmare. Are we looking at a reasonable compliance situation?
Through the mayor to members of council, it's fairly early in the process. I think right now, we have not had good uptake on compliance with this so far. But we are also ramping up our enforcement. And I do think that this will be one of those items where it may be difficult to get compliance initially, but eventually this will be very manageable in terms of compliance and ensuring that everybody does pay for their business licenses.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Oh, Councillor Taylor.
Can you give us an update on the photo radar program? It's now March and we approved an extension January 1st.
Yeah, I will pass that to Mr. DeBodro.
Through the mayor to all of council. The ATE program is active. They have hired a operator for the program who has completed their training. We're still waiting on their appointments. So we, at this time, still have temporary operators in town working to the old program that we had. So the same intersections are being enforced. They're only here a couple days a week. But once the operator's in place, they will be working full time in the town of Hinton. And I anticipate those appointments to be made within the next week or so.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for the
Fire
question.
Chief. Council. Anything further? Councillor Race?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just seeing our fire chief sparked a memory last week after our student advisory meeting. There was a police open house, which was awesome. Awesome. The information that they shared at that meeting was really, really good. A lot of really good information on e-bikes. So if anybody wants that information, just go to the YouTube channel and listen to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, anything further? With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Haas.
I'd like to move that we adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas, and we will do this one traditionally. Council, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone.